Welcome everyone to our Friday Town Hall, our role in ending systemic racism internally and universally. Really, we're looking at this. We have had the pleasure of meeting for the past several months, learning, growing, exploring topics, processing our own internal biases, and also looking at how organizations, schools, associations, classrooms, and from every angle that we can look at, what is our role and what can we do about racism? So we welcome you all today. We're glad you found us. I say that in quotations because we have a new time today. And so we want to give everybody a couple of minutes to get logged on today and kind of get settled in. We will ask that you mute your mics until we kind of turn the mic over for conversation. Couple of housekeeping things it's important to keep in mind. Number one, to mute, and you have an unmute, you're welcome to unmute yourself. Because we generally have a fairly large group, we ask that you use your virtual.
Kathy, you accidentally muted yourself.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm back, I think. Okay. So you may mute or unmute yourself, as I just demonstrated. I was just modeling for you, so thank you for that. You will see on your participants button at the bottom of your screen a way for you to click on the hand, and that will show me in our window who would like to speak or participate in some way, ask a question or share a story. You also have the option of entering something into the chat box. So again, at the bottom of your virtual screen, you'll see the chat. If you click on that, it'll open up a chat box. You can type your questions, comments, suggestions right in there as well. Sarah also has added the agenda there, and we will be continuing to add links to resources. You can save your chat down in the bottom, 3 little dots that you can click on, and you can save your chat, or you can copy and paste it into another document. Because often there's some really important things that you want to retain or go back and look at later. So again, thank you all for taking your time to join us on a Friday afternoon. We very much appreciate it for this very important work. I'm Kathy Leach on behalf of the Montessori Foundation and the International Montessori Council. I welcome you to our Friday Town Hall. I'm joined today by several colleagues. Well, all of you are colleagues, and we appreciate that. Several of our Montessori Foundation staff and IMC board members. We have with us today Kitty Bravo. Kitty, if you can just give us a wave. Kitty's the Director of Education at the Center for Guided Montessori Studies and a IMC board member. So Kitty, thanks for being here with us today. Tanya Reiskind is here with us today, consultant with the Montessori Foundation and co-head of school at our lab school, the Newgate School in Sarasota, Florida. I'm also joined today by our founder and president of the Montessori Foundation, chair of the Montessori Council, and that's Tim Selden. Tim, thanks so much for being here and for really providing us this platform of opportunity for us to get together as a Montessori community. I think that, really our opportunity to have these kinds of conversations and be able to be in community has been a blessing to us through some very challenging times. And one of our very special guests today is Sarah Lavallee. Sarah is coming to us from, I think, are you still in California, Sarah? Yes, okay, so still in California. Sarah will be assisting and helping us see videos and post resources and things like that. Sarah is the Director of Social Justice at the Child Unique School in Alameda, California. And then last but certainly not least, our leader of our social justice task force. On behalf of the IMC, we thank you every week for guiding us. This is Dr. Cindy Acker. Cindy's founder of the Child Unique School in Alameda, and also has, as I said, been leading our social justice task force and our work together. So I will now turn it over to Cindy And I'll be watching for suggestions, hands up, all of those kinds of things. So thanks for joining us. And Cindy, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Sarah, can you start the first video?
It's well, it's easier to be a parent this morning. It's easier to be a dad.
Van, what are your thoughts?
It's well, it's easier to be a parent this morning. It's easier to be a dad. It's easier to tell your kids character matters. It matters. Telling the truth matters. Being a good person matters. And it's easier for a whole lot of people. If you're Muslim in this country, you don't have to worry if the president doesn't want you here. If you're an immigrant, you don't have to worry if the president's going to be happier to have babies snatched away or send dreamers back for no reason. It's a vindication for a lot of people who have really suffered. You know, I can't breathe. You know, that wasn't just George Floyd. That was a lot of people that felt that they couldn't breathe. Every day you're waking up and you're getting these tweets and you just don't know, and you're going to the store and people who have been afraid to show their racism are getting nastier and nastier to you, and you're worried about your kids and you're worried about your sister. And can she just go to Walmart and get back into her car without somebody saying something to her? And you spent so much of your life energy just trying to hold it together. And this is a big deal for us just to be able to get some peace and have a chance for a reset. And the character of the country matters. And being a good man matters. You know, I just want my sons to look at this. Look at this. You know, it's easy to do it the cheap way and get away with stuff, but it comes back around. It comes back around. And this is a good day for this country. I'm sorry for the people who lost. For them, it's not a good day. But for a whole lot of people, it's a good day.
That was really not a partisan statement. That was a human statement. So I'd like us to still do our moment of silence as we do, because I think that we have an opportunity now to find an end to dissension and violence. And no matter what our view was of the outcome, we need an evolution of hope, an evolution of peace. We need to see anew the work that is before us. And that's what I want you to take into this moment of silence before we start. Thank you. When we met, not last week, but the week before, we questioned why we still have Montessori schools with few children of color or few Black children. And I questioned our commitment as Montessorians to have diverse communities, diverse classrooms, diverse faculty, diverse leadership, and specifically Black people in that leadership, because in many places there are none. In order for us to continue this conversation, I want you to again revisit some history. And so I'm going to be showing you a few videos because I want us to take a journey. Because we tend to believe that desegregation ended in the 50s or the 60s, And I want to suggest that most of us have had the privilege of not even considering that desegregation didn't end. Those who have been in the majority have not even had to think about it. I want you to know that race makes a difference in school, not just out there. For me, I went to a predominantly Black school, elementary school, and I didn't notice race as much when I was in elementary school. I only knew when I got to the office. I was the only Black child in the office, and I wasn't in the office because I was in trouble. I was in the office because the principal would ask me to come in to help her because I was the smart kid that they didn't quite know what to do with. I was the only Black child, though, in the special classes that were for gifted children, where we would do things that had to do with science and math. I was consistently, from 1st through 6th grade, the only Black child who was there. I was the only Black child who didn't know how to play sports. I was never chosen to be on anybody's team. And I was the only Black child who took French and honors classes in junior high. I was the only Black student, in fact, the only student who didn't have to take a class for the 3 years that I was in junior high, because what I did instead was to teach a child how to speak English who spoke Spanish. And I was one of a couple at Lowell in high school. And as mentioned, I was the Black child who never got invited into the counselor's office to discuss college options. It makes a difference. In my entire time, from kindergarten through college, I only saw 2 Black educators, from kindergarten until I received my doctorate, who taught me. And it's important that you know, as Montessorians, that that makes a difference. It makes such a difference when you don't see yourself reflected in leadership. And if you want to truly do something to end the preponderant situations in which children of color do not see models in education, then you will not stop until it's changed. You will not be a bystander at your school or anywhere without questioning and pushing back at practices that allow us to ignore the need to change this. We won't be Montessorians who say, wow, there's not a lot of Black children in the school, or I don't have any Black children in my school, but I don't know what to do about that. When we speak of what's called best practices in education, this issue to me is a best practice. So I want to share some history of segregation in schools to some recent history of segregation to help you understand that holding schools with children of one primary color is an attempt to turn back the rule of segregation that occurred with the court case of Brown versus the Board of Education in '54. And I want you to be patient with these videos and take some notes on the things that you might want to talk about afterwards, or put them in the chat if you feel like you can't hold it. But let's start, Sarah, by refreshing your minds with a history lesson about desegregation.
What are you talking about? In Brown versus the Board of Education, the Supreme Court decided that we can't racially segregate our schools anymore. Well, that worked for a while. We definitely saw improved integration through at least the late 1980s. But today, American schools are more segregated than they were over 4 decades ago. No, seriously, that's a true story. In 2011, for example, more than 40% of Black students attended schools that were 90% people of color or more. That's up 5% from 1991, which means we're going backwards. So what's going on here?
We are definitely reversing a lot of the progress that was made certainly in the late 50s and throughout the 60s.
Back in the day, there were all these court orders that required schools by law to desegregate. This was a way to combat all the massive resistance to the Brown v. Board decision. Now you might be thinking, Nano, stop being so dramatic. Get out of here with all this massive resistance talk. No, massive resistance was literally the name of a policy adopted by Virginia's state government in 1956 to block desegregation efforts in public schools. But now those court orders have expired, which means school districts don't have have to do the work required to make their schools less segregated. And we can thank the Supreme Court for that. Starting in the 1990s, the Supreme Court passed a series of decisions that dissolved almost all of the desegregation plans that followed Brown v. Board. In some instances, schools wanted to keep their integration plans, such as busing, because they were working so well. But they weren't allowed to because the Supreme Court said that they were discriminatory against white students. By the way, this kind of segregation isn't just happening in states below the Mason-Dixon line. It's happening in, drumroll please, New York. The South is actually the least segregated region for black students. And Latinos in progressive, new age, quinoa-loving, gluten-free California are the most segregated students in the country. And the epicenter of this resegregation happens to be right here in LA. That's because the Supreme Court put more demanding court orders on southern states to desegregate their schools, but didn't do the same for northern and western states. I guess the Supreme Court just thought there was no racism in the North and the West. And another
That was your stopping point, Cindy. Is that what you wanted?
And can you come out of it and go to the next one?
Can you see the new one?
A lot of white communities in the South fiercely resisted the new rules for years.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow.
Chromebooks don't just start fast, they stay fast over time. So you can get to work fast and get to not work fast too. Okay, now we're just showing off. Switch to starting fast and staying fast. Switch to Chromebook.
Apologies.
And segregation
Out and then
now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Right away. A lot of white communities in the South fiercely resisted the new rules for years.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
It wasn't until about a decade later, when federal courts literally forced districts to desegregate, that things started to change. Southern schools really started to integrate in the 1970s and 80s because of new programs like cross-district busing that brought a mix of kids from different communities to the same schools. In 1968, more than 3/4 of all black students in the South attended hyper-segregated schools. 20 years later, that rate had dropped to less than 1/4 of all students. There are lots of historical studies showing that this change had an overwhelming positive impact on black student achievement, with pretty much no negative impacts for white students. But not everyone was happy with a more racially integrated school system. A new generation of conservative judges rejected the idea that the federal government should be in the business of forcing local schools to integrate. Districts throughout the South, and some in the North too, began to drop their controversial busing programs, which many community members had rebelled against for years. There were other factors too, including what's called white flight, when a large number of mostly white middle-class communities moved from urban areas to the suburbs. The result? There's been a massive drop in the number of schools that have a balanced mix of students who are white and students who are black and Latino. According to a study by UCLA's Civil Rights Project, the number of hyper-segregated public schools across the country, those with pretty much no white students, has tripled. This resegregation trend has been the most dramatic in the South. But before you Northern liberals get too high and mighty, you should know that segregation is actually worse in the North. In fact, the states with the highest rates of school segregation are almost all northern left-leaning ones, like New York, Illinois, Maryland, New Jersey, and yes, even California. So another...
thank you, Sarah.
Should I go to the next one?
No, hold on one sec. So there were the laws of Brown versus the Board of Education that said that schools were supposed to be segregated. The law in itself wasn't fully established for the northern and the western states because they had less of a problem. And so they didn't think they needed to have those strong laws, those strong desegregation laws. But then what happened is that over time, then those areas became the areas that became just as, and at times even more segregated than the areas that were in the South. For many people, the law that had to do with desegregating schools was met with outrage. A lot of schools closed down rather than have Black children in their schools. A lot of parents stopped having their children go to school. And the concept of private school, charter school, that concept of trying to set up a school that was according to one's preference, one's racial preference, or one's religious preference started to really surface. And some of those schools still exist, or the reason behind why the school existed may have changed over time, but still sits on the book. And those words of George Wallace, Governor George Wallace, segregation now, segregation forever, that has just become a quiet statement that has been exhibited by people's actions and what they're doing in schools. So much so that it is just recent that some schools in the South, for example, have just stopped having segregation on some level. And Sarah, can you share that one?
In Wilcox County, Georgia, up until about a week ago, there's never been a non-segregated prom in history. Even now, in the year 2013, there were always 2 proms planned, one for the white students and one for the Black students. Neither the school board nor the Wilcox County High School sponsors a prom. However, for decades, the parents and students have held separate parties at the end of the year, calling one a Black prom and one a white prom. Wilcox County High School in the South Georgia town of Rochelle drew a vast amount of negative attention from social media after reports of the segregated proms found itself in newspapers, TV stations, and on Facebook.
In rural areas in Georgia, when schools integrated in 70 and 71, proms stopped in many rural areas, primarily because white parents could not see their children socializing at a prom. But proms didn't go away. They became private parties.
And that's the legal loophole. They're allowed to discriminate because it's a private event.
You know, when you hear the parents defend it, and even the students defend it, now it's under the guise of tradition. This is the way we've always done it.
It is also...
Thank you, Sarah. And then as west as California, in my own backyard and Sarah's, and as recent as 2019, the San Francisco Bay Area had a school that was caught with a history of intentional segregation. Sarah.
Yeah, Ken, back in 2016, we reported on allegations of segregation at this mostly Black school that's about a mile from Tony, mostly white, Sausalito. And today, the state attorney general dropped a bombshell after a 2-year investigation. He says there was segregation and it was intentional.
The district was segregating its students by race. And after a thorough investigation, sure enough, that's what we found.
California Attorney General Javier Becerra says the segregation within the Sausalito Marin City School District was no accident. His investigation revealed that the district had knowingly established an intentionally segregated school. That school, Bayside Martin Luther King Jr., a small, mostly Black K-8 school in Marin City. The investigation found that it was built based largely on one Board of Trustee member's desire to create a separate school for the district's African-American community. Once the school was established, within 1 year, the district began cutting programming at the intentionally segregated K-8 school. In 2016, a district report found that millions of dollars were being taken away from Bayside MLK and funneled into Willow Creek Academy, a wealthy Sausalito charter school. Terry Green has grandchildren in the Sausalito Marin City School District. She says as disturbing as the findings are, she's seen the discrimination up close.
It didn't come as a shock to us.
But Green says she's inspired by the Attorney General's solution to the problem, a settlement that mandates a series of changes to desegregate the district. Within 90 days, the district will have to form a desegregation advisory group and then come up with a comprehensive education plan that would attract diverse students, all of it overseen by a third-party monitor. District Superintendent Itopo Garcia says he's inspired to create changes.
It's really exciting to have the opportunity to build a high-performing, integrated, highly diverse school.
The district will have 5 years to meet the standards, but Terry says if the district has the will,
we could get this together in the next year, no more than 2, if people are serious.
The Attorney General says the problem may not just be isolated to this area. His findings may just be the tip of the iceberg.
Chances are, South Toledo, Marin City School District is not the only place where a whole bunch of kids, principally because of their color, are not being given the equal chance to learn.
Thank you, Sarah. And what he said is that Sausalito and Marin are not the only cities. And let's look at one more.
New York City's District 3 includes both the white and wealthier parts of the Upper West Side and black, brown, and poorer sections of southern Harlem. There are 16 middle schools in the district, and thanks to a complicated set of admissions criteria, the top performing schools are dominated by affluent.
Hello, Alex. Who are you? British Secret Intelligence is something we'd like you to do.
Sarah, do you want to?
I know Krav Maga. I know shooting people in the head.
Affluent white and Asian kids. Fewer than 10% of the students at those schools come from low-income families. In some other parts of the district, almost 100% of the kids come from low-income families of color. So parents and District 3 leaders introduced a plan that would reserve at least 25% of all seats at each school for students who are struggling. This means some high-achieving students aren't going to get their top school choice.
We have
And then there's my high school, whom I spoke about a couple of weeks ago.
A major change could be coming to San Francisco's Lowell High School. It's one of the few public high schools in the country where admission is based on merit, similar to how universities select students. But KPX5's Don Lin reports the process could soon change from a performance-based system to pure chance.
The district commissioners blame the pandemic, saying they can't rank the student applicants because they did not give out grades for the spring semester. Students got pass or no pass. Also, they can't test the students because all classes are conducted online.
It is disappointing that we don't have a better solution and that this is just the option.
Parent Annika Ehrlich has 2 boys in the San Francisco Unified School District. Her 8th grader has been studying hard and is applying to attend Lowell High School, one of the best and most competitive in the country.
He might be one of these kids that would have had a good chance of getting into Lowell, and now it might be more equal to everybody else.
The school says about 900 students were admitted to this year's freshman class out of 2,000 applicants. The proposed random lottery admission system would last for 1 year, next fall. But some parents worry the board will later make it permanent to increase diversity. Right now, less than 2% of the students at Lowell are black.
I wish I had a lot.
Thank you, Sarah. So some of you may have remembered that I mentioned something happening with my old high school. I think when I was there, I can't imagine that there were 2%. There were 2 or 3 of us. But how unfortunate that they are feeling that their students will have to be equal with other students, and that they cannot resort to the segregation that the school has had for its inception from the time that it was founded. So I'm curious, what's percolated for you?
Well, Cindy, one thing to keep in mind, the chat has been very quiet, which generally in my observation has meant that people are very thoughtful. I'm going to give you a minute to think about, raise your hand, add to the chat. One thing that came to mind for me is, having been head of school for 27 years, I always kept a box of Kleenex fairly close by on my desk, because often people come in, they're quite emotional. And I found myself in this meeting always keeping a box of Kleenex handy, because it's really, you bring us things that are thought-provoking, yes, but there's an emotion that keeps welling up when you bring these things, and I don't have a label for it. I just thought it was important to share that does keep coming up for me.
Thank you.
Stephanie has her hand up, so we'll go to Stephanie if you can unmute.
I just have a question, Cindy. So one of the things that I'm just wondering about is, I know that, I think in my heart of hearts, I want everything to be, everyone to have a place and be together and make it all work. But I'm just wondering, is there a place and a time for having schools that are for high achieving students, or just Black students, or just whatever? Is that a bad thing? What happens when kids go into, like, Lowell? It's this sort of high achieving academic focused school, and now it's a lottery. What happens with the kids that can't do that kind of work, or don't want to do that kind of work?
You know, I honestly feel, and this may sound a little blunt, but I feel it's their turn, because I think that there are the children who are test takers. And I, during that time, I was a smart kid, but I was also a good test taker. And so I was able to get into Lowell, and I wasn't like the first pick, but I was able to get in, because they had to be able to say that they had some other demographics other than predominantly Asian and Caucasian. And so the thing that I have discovered over time is that there are many Black students who are bright. There are many Latinx students who are bright, and they don't get to get in, because they don't meet the criteria. And I think that that's unfortunate, because what happened to me is that I literally got thrown into a situation in which I already didn't have teachers who looked like me, but then I didn't have anybody who looked like me. And so I was in this situation in which the majority of the students who were there, most of the Asian students who were there, had parents who were like on them to achieve a lot. And so they were constantly within that frame of mind, and their parents were sending them to tutors afterwards and tutors before and the whole 9 yards. My parents didn't know about anything like that. And so I was a student who did really well, and then I was a student who was lost. I was lost culturally, I was lost academically, and there was no one who was there to be able to assist and support me. And so I think that
Is it safe to say then that the problem is that the fact that Lowell doesn't and didn't have very many or almost at all children of color, it's because of the systemic issues that start all the way back to early childhood education, right? And that the access is denied to all these children that do have the aptitude, but don't have the gateway,
opportunity, perhaps?
right? The opportunity.
Yeah.
And the environment that is propelling these other kids that are white.
Yes. And I will also say that there are some schools, like some of the Black universities that were started, who I think that the thing that they did was to allow students to be able to see other students strive, to have people who had their back, who were trying to help them to have some understanding and appreciation of their own culture, and what they can do in the world and the things that they can change in the world. And that was needed to undo the history-long inability for students of color to read, to write, to feel anything of themselves. And so I think that those universities and some schools, they have a place where students need to be able to find themselves and need to be able to navigate this systemic racism in the world that we're living in. And they give them a foot up to be able to operate in the environment.
Thank you for that. We have a couple more hands up, so I'll go to Tanya Melville first and then to Leslie. Tanya, if you can unmute.
Hi.
There you
Hi. I went into my state tracker to pull up the demographics again for our public Montessori school. And we're currently at 34% Black, 52% white, and then of course 14% in other categories. But and we tend to fluctuate between 34 to 48% Black in our school. I think the challenge for me as a Montessorian is pulling teachers of color to our school. Again, I don't want to say that it's for one reason or another, but some of the things that I've been looking at is Montessori, the culture of Montessori is that attractive to student teachers of color if they were given enough opportunity to investigate it. Because I don't think at the colleges, at the college level, there's an in-depth study of it. And then the other thing too is then how do you market that in a way that is culturally sensitive also? Because I think there is a predominant kind of feeling out there in the community that, oh, Montessori schools are elitist, or that's just for white kids, or it's just for children, you know, at the younger ages, and we serve pre-K 4 through 8. I think it's changing, but I'm wondering if at the training level, if there's a focus on recruiting teachers of color into the Montessori training programs. I guess that's the challenge for me, is having a pool of Montessorians of color from which to draw.
Imagine if all of the training programs pooled their money and funded a commercial where you were looking at Arlette Crump in her school and operating in her school, and that maybe the only words that you say is, you too can make a difference. You know, it's
and I have teachers too of color that could represent that. Excellent teachers, excellent Montessorians. I guess I would just like to see the balance.
Imagine if teacher training programs took the lead in that, to just show Montessori teachers of color, because that alone says, oh, I can be that, I can do that.
Thank you. We'll go to Leslie next, if you can unmute, Leslie. No, we're not hearing you yet, Leslie. Not yet. Not yet. No, something's not working there. You try to do that behind the scenes, and we'll go on. If anyone else has a comment, go ahead and either watching the chat. There's a couple of things there. We have, Debbie says, this does feel like the mountain is so high and given the climate in the country, but a hand up benefits everyone in the end. I think that was back in relation to the lottery that we were talking about. And Gigi O'Brien, I think I understand Stephanie's perspective. Our goal is to have a balance of opportunity and achievement and cultural connection. I think the biggest travesty is the inequality of resources and support. That's where I feel the injustice lies. That piece that showed the resources were diverted from the school in Marin to the prominently white school seemed practically criminal, in my opinion. And Stephanie wants to clarify this is not really her perspective, just questions, just learning. So yeah, I think that one of the things that Cindy, that you brought to our attention and Stephanie sort of picked up on was there's a resource issue, but there's also the gateways all the way up. It's the obstacles, you know, from birth and generationally, not just from your own birth, but from the generations before you. And so if we only look at resources today, really, we're not even starting with a level playing field to begin with.
Right.
Yeah.
I think Tim has his hand up, Kathy.
Oh, Tim, go right ahead.
One of the things that I just want to remind us is that a big part of what really makes schools great is the relationship among the people. One of the challenges, when we talk about systemic policy decisions and segregation that has happened, we also have to remember that part of the solution is to create a culture within the school that is not focused on the idea of every child hitting certain benchmarks, every child learning in a certain way, and teachers who are simply, as Kitty would say, the sage on the stage. The idea of creating communities, family, partnership that goes way beyond bake sales and being lectured at between students, teachers, families, I think is a big part of what makes schools effective around the world.
It's definitely a piece. I mean, you can have all of that and have racist families and racist people who are making connections and feeding each other's racism through their connections with each other. And so it's definitely a piece, but it's not all of it.
Watching, let's see, Courtney Davis, and then I have a couple of comments in the chat that I think it'd be great to hear from. So I'll go to Courtney first, if you can unmute, please.
Hi. Thinking about you all's conversation about employment with Black teachers, I have to say that I am listening in, and I know my co-teacher is as well, that I'm a Black Montessorian here in the state of Alabama. I live in one of the biggest city in Alabama, and for the last 15 years, I have been the only full-time teacher in my school. There are not any Montessori schools in the Birmingham city at all, not even public Montessori. We don't have charter schools as well, knowing that Alabama is behind and all of that. But the gap is where you are not in the city, you're not gonna get those that live in the city to come out to the suburbs. They're not gonna come to the places of the surrounding areas that are of wealthier families, where they're all private schools. They're not being attractive to the families of the city. They're gonna have to change their mindset. It's not that they don't want to, but Alabama, especially Birmingham, is still very segregated. That's the way that the South has seemed to be. It seems like they're still learning and processing how to get over those hurdles. But Montessori in the South is a distant thought in education as of right now.
Thank you for sharing that, Courtney. I mean, that's very sad for us, but it's also, it also should make us aware that that's a place that we need to direct some attention. And do you think that the reason why other families won't go to where the schools are, I'm assuming you mean even if there was a scholarship that was available, that it wouldn't be where they would go because they fear, they fear racism?
I think there's a fear of racism, a fear of the child feeling like they don't belong. I can say for our school, we have one child on scholarship, and sad to say, she is a Black child. That should not be the only child on scholarship, and it should not just be a Black child that is the child on scholarship. I think there is a sense and a fear that coming into the suburb areas, coming from the city, that there is fear that they won't be treated equally. They still have the mindset of segregation forever, that their children just won't fit in. Bill O'Connor and the governor, they made that loud and clear, and it still rings true in Birmingham. Yes, there is a fight for this to change, but it's taking a lot of us to work to it, but the progress is very slow.
And do you think that the first answer is bringing Montessori to where those families are, or having a school that is where people are woke, where it's a race-conscious school offering opportunity for children to come with a parent body that is also racial?
I would say the school I am is a very race aware, making the efforts constantly. School family as a whole, but I think you're going to have the mindset exactly like we do in Montessori, that we're going to have to meet these families exactly where they are. And that means going in the inner city, going in those neighborhoods and starting Montessori schools, showing them that this is another form of education that works for Black children, that we don't have to be scared of this. Birmingham city schools are failing. We're not even close to being ranked anywhere. We're probably one of the most failing school systems states beyond the states. But knowing that if the states are failing us through the school system, then there has to be other options that do work. And those families don't know, because right now they're private. And if there are families of low income, they're not going to be able to afford tuitions that are more than their rent or their mortgage.
Yeah. Understood. Thank you, Courtney. That is the segregation reality within Montessori, and
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you, Courtney, and thanks for being willing to stay on. I will say that your co-teacher Amanda has been putting some things in the chat, and also has spoken about the things that you're sharing. So there's several things in there, and she says you're her wonderful co-teacher. So I really want to acknowledge that, because when you find co-teachers that think that highly of each other, it's always beautiful to see. So thank you. We also have Gulsevin, who made a comment, and Gulsevin, thanks for being here. She made a comment about Tanya's comment about, where are we going to find these teachers? It's Tanya Melville. She says, I agree with Tanya. How can we attract teachers from minority groups to teacher education programs? I'm sure we would all like to have more adult learners reflecting diversity. And then Leslie also couldn't get her mic working, but she has put a comment in here. Leslie says, how much does the racial makeup of the community play into the racial goals of the school? For example, I live in Tucson. We have 5.1% Black African American and 43% Hispanic Latino population. Should our staff hiring goals reflect the racial cultural makeup of our city? Should we try to have our teaching staff include more Hispanic teachers than, say, Black teachers? Public Montessori, she goes on, although that's that's Leslie who gave that thing. So do you want to respond to that, Cindy, or just?
Yeah. I would say that you look at what your population is, because you're also going to be drawing from that population. But you want to definitely make sure that you're hitting the parent and children who are in your school now. And so to me, that would be a reflection of Latino and Black teachers, and maybe more Latino teachers than Black teachers. But that you want to reflect your school, and you want to reflect the community that you're trying to bring in, and you also want to educate your community. And I say that carefully because people don't think about when there's a school that has mostly white teachers, but you should have parents who aren't thinking about it if you have a school that is predominantly Black and Latinx teachers either. You want to turn the tide, and so definitely you should mirror your school. You should try to mirror your community, but you should also not feel like you need to overpopulate on the white side if you have had a whole lot of white teachers. Help your parents to be able to see other people who are not like them.
Right, and I think that's that becomes, and you've brought it to our attention multiple times, that it's even more important in the schools that are predominantly white and are in predominantly white communities. And so it's not our excuse to say, well, we're reflective of our community. We still have obligations. And so, I think that it's a much bigger issue than just reflective of the percentages in your, this is not, by the numbers, so to speak. It's more than the numbers, I guess, is where we're
right.
trying
And
to
your
go.
role is to be an educator, and it's not just to the things that are on the shelf. Your role is to constantly educate, and you're educating your children, and you're educating your parents. You're educating all of them to change, to make this a different world. And to the person who had the comment before that in the chat, I would say, yeah, that it's on the teacher training centers and it's on the schools. You need to open up so that people feel welcome. You need to educate people about Montessori, and people need to see, it's like it wasn't until I saw a Black golfer that I realized that Black people could golf. I thought it was only a white game. It's because when you don't see yourself reflected, your mind doesn't create a mental model around that. And so it's on us. It's on us to have to give access. It's on us to be welcoming. It's on us to find people and to go where they are.
Thank you. And Gulsovan is a very long time teacher educator. She may want to share with some more information with us, but I'm going to go to Terry Sherrill next with her hand up. Then we'll go to Margaret, and then we'll come back to some chat.
I was just going to say that a school that I worked at East Dallas Community School with Terry Ford, that they really did a lot of outreach to parents. And I know a lot of us say, oh, I came to Montessori because of my own child. Well, she really made a point to identify parents from the community in the school and make sure that she invited them to take training, and was able to get then a lot of almost all of our staff reflected the community because it came from parents in that community. So that's just another pipeline or resource that might seem obvious, but in any community, you're going to find the nurturing hearts that want to teach, and so identify them and invite them to get training. It's an idea.
I appreciate that happened, and it's inviting them, and it's really helping them see that they can be a part of it. And Kathy, I just want to note that when you talked about needing a tissue close, Terry was holding up her tissue box.
Oh, Terry and I are kindred spirits with our tissues. Yes, no, most definitely. Also, I think just coming back to Terry's point about recruiting parents in communities of color, it's also we think about the high school programs, the VOTECs that prepare young people to become childcare workers and to be early childhood educators on a sort of a ladder program. They start in the high school, they get some basics and move through. And that they may not understand or realize that Montessori is an option. And so are we reaching people who look at childcare as a profession and think education and college degrees are outside of their realm of opportunity? And I think that we can certainly do something there as teacher educators and teacher education programs as well. And I did say I was going to go to Margaret. So Margaret, thank you for your patience. If you could unmute. There you go. You should be unmuted now. Oh,
can you hear me?
No, we can. Nope, now not.
How about that? Is that working?
That worked.
Okay. So our school is in the South and it is urban, and we are still figuring out lots of things and are definitely like a work in progress in some ways. And in other ways, we've done some things that brought diversity at the outset in a really lovely way. So I wanted to share what a few of those are. One is that we are in an urban low-income neighborhood, and we founded here on purpose because we wanted to serve children from this neighborhood whose access to high-quality education was not very good. And so we are one of the Montessori Partnership for Georgia sliding scale schools, and we reserve about 50%, slightly less sometimes, but about 50% of our slots go to kids who are on a sliding scale for tuition, which means they pay based on their own family's income. And so our tuition for half-day Children's House is about $625 a month, but people on the sliding scale, the vast majority of them pay $94 a month. And one of the things is we're looking at sort of the economics and how to scale that, because it was tricky getting started, and we did it because I and some other volunteers and then staff members worked for free and then for very low wages, and we know that that's not scalable to grow a school, and so now all teachers are paid. But as we look at scaling it, one of the things that I think is critically important is not lowering that ratio of low-income kids by very much, because if you have the situation that in Birmingham, where you've got one Black child who's a scholarship child, even if it's just a small number of kids, then the sort of more privileged set is what is the prevailing school culture. And here it's not. Here it definitely is not. And so our kids learn in this really organic way the differences between families with food scarcity and families where they have a lot of kind of luxury foods, and they learn to try different things. The other thing that I will say, I think is a piece of what we've done that's a really positive thing, is that the very first conversation I have with every single parent as part of the admissions process from the founding of the school on is that we are a community that welcomes diversity. And I talk about all different kinds of diversity in that. We have diverse family compositions where we have parents who are married to each other, parents who've never been married to each other, same gendered parents, children living with grandparents or great grandparents who have custody of them because their parents are incarcerated. I talk about the religious diversity we have, which is Muslim people and Christian people and agnostic people and Buddhist people. I talk about economic diversity. We have children who have a range of abilities. We've got a third grader who is doing calculus, and we've got a 7-year-old who has significant challenges reading still. And we talk about that diversity as it's really wide and diverse, which means everybody can have a place here if they want it. But we realize and recognize that that kind of diversity isn't what everybody seeking a private school wants. And so if you're that kind of person, we're probably not the right school for you. And there are plenty of other schools in our area where you can be served. But if that is part of your value system, then hey, we want you, come in, be a part of us, help us grow, reinforce that in your kids. And so what it means is that we've got a lot of folks who come from all across the area, not just this neighborhood, who really have that value system, who want a school that reflects it. So I've never had a hard time getting parents. So I've talked a lot about economics, but what I find is that in putting economics as sort of the centerpiece, it also brings us pretty rich racial diversity. And I think that we have always had probably a significant, well over 30%, and often close to 50% of our student body has been multiracial, Black, BIPOC folks. We don't have as many Asian community students as are generally reflected in other affluent Montessori schools that aren't in the middle of low-income neighborhoods, because I think, I don't mean to overgeneralize, but I think some of those parents come take a look at our school and it doesn't feel safe and comfortable to them in the same kind of way. And
Nice.
So the other thing is that we did not start off with an incredibly diverse staff, because we started off with a staff of well-meaning people who could afford to work for free, right? Which doesn't get diversity in our midst yet. And so we are working on that this year. The other administrator at our school is not a trained Montessorian, but she's retired civil service, Black woman who is in her mid-60s, who is the day-to-day face of running the school. And I think that has been great for our kids, our toddler program folks, our people of color. We have had Hispanic people, native Spanish speakers teaching in our children's house, but do not currently. And so we're working on that. And I think what we're going to have to do is identify people we like, and send them off to training, because it's really hard to attract people to Augusta, Georgia.
Yeah,
and then the kind of final thought that I thought was worth sharing was that I've got a daughter who's a sophomore in college. And a few years ago, we went on the Mammoth College tour of looking at all the elite schools, because she's a high achieving kid. And she was drawn because we went to elite schools in the Northeast first. When she came back south and was visiting schools, and they didn't talk about 25% of their student body being first generation college students and all the supports they have for that, she's like, this school won't suit me, they're too racist. And so I was thinking in terms of the Montessori movement, making a move to mimic sort of the process that has mixed success in higher ed, but where they are very intentionally all about supporting students who need a lot of extra supports to be successful at the higher ages. So that was a lot. I'll be quiet.
Thanks for sharing all of that, Margaret.
Thank you, Margaret.
Interesting that you said, well, we're gonna have to send people off for training. I think we have a shortage of Montessori teachers no matter what. And so this is always going to be a prevalent concern for us. And what can we do to attract Black professionals, men and women, to come into this field and sponsor the training, whether they can afford it or not is not really the point. The point is how are our schools contributing and supporting that. I don't see any more hands up. Cindy, did you want to make some comments and then we could go to chat, or do you have some other direction?
I have a next thing. So it takes intentionality to turn this around. And so I wonder, in your mind, what does it mean to create an intentional, diverse school, an intentionally diverse school? You have homework. We're going to look at it just a little bit. Sarah, if you can put in the chat, there is something that is called creating an intentionally diverse school. And it gives you lots of information about it. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I believe is really important about creating an intentionally diverse school. And I put that on everybody, including me, that you must have as your commitment, and the staff must have as their commitment, and parents must have as their commitment, that you attract racially diverse students and racially diverse teachers. Everybody needs to be on the same train and running down the track with this as their intention. It can't only be yours, and it can't only be a couple of people in the office. You need to have a community that is actually divested in that they know that that's a part of the goal of the school. And you also, beyond just saying that you're going to attempt to attract racially diverse students, you also want to create an environment where every member of the school is valued, respected, and important, regardless of their income, their religious preferences, their family dynamics. And by that, I don't just mean make everybody feel warm and cozy, but I mean bring them in. We send our calendar out to our parents. I send it to parents that I know are Jewish, Muslim, et cetera, et cetera. I send it out to them. And one year, I think year before last, I forgot to do that. And we ended up with a holiday in the middle of Ramadan. That was a meal-based event. And we don't do that kind of thing. We really attempt not to, by sending our calendar out to our parents to say, how does this hit you? And we don't end up creating a dominant culture mentality around what we think should happen in the school. We bring that diverse community that we're saying we want, we bring them into the conversations. And that you have intentional conversations. Homogeneous schools don't need to do that. Schools that are intentionally diverse do. You need to bring people in to conversations. And as I think it was Margaret said that they have parent meetings, or someone mentioned that they have parent meetings, that you need to do that. You need to have intentional conversations with students, and you need to have intentional conversations with staff that may feel uncomfortable to them, but are things that need to happen. And that if you have as your goal that you're going to recruit more teachers of color, then you need to make that your mission first. And you need to look at that, and you need to claim that, and you need to say that to your staff. We are looking to diversify our staff. If you're taking training, please look for teachers who may be diverse, who might be interested in Montessori. I remember someone asking someone once, well, do you want teachers, do you want a good employee, or do you want a person of color? And the answer was yes. Yes. There's a school that said it's not just that our school is diverse. It's and making sure our students, our faculty and administration, and others in the community are having those intentional conversations as well. If you're doing your work really well, your parents are sharing that information with other people. It's understanding your larger community. Someone asked me after the last town hall, what do they do? Because the areas of color are not near their school, and so what do they do? Because they don't know how to bring people in. And I said, go there, bring school information to those areas. Speak to the people with look up your Black-owned businesses. Bring information to those Black-owned businesses. Ask them if there's a way for you to be able to share that. Tell them what your commitment is. They'll appreciate that commitment. And ask them to partner with you to find out if they have a bulletin board where you can put information up, or if there's a night that you can present something via Zoom or outside or something like that. But partner in and come to know those communities. If you act as though they're other, that they're over there other people, you aren't creating a sense of welcoming. And it means that you still have your own race conscious work to do in preparation for having those families. You need to be able to be in their community to understand their community. It's important to establish relationships with other people in communities so that you bring them in, speakers of color, and that you have partnerships with things that are happening that affect children of color or families of color. Maintain data analysis of how many staff members you have, how many children you have. Somebody who was able to give us those numbers just a little bit ago. Know that and have your goal set for that. Not, oh, I know we have a couple here and a couple there, but actually have yourself with an intention to raise those numbers and know what those numbers are. And make sure that your staff know what those numbers are and that your parents know what those numbers are. And that they should know. We're really erring in this area where we really want to diversify our staff a little bit more. We really want to bring in more students of color. And so please help us with that. And then be prepared to reduce barriers for those families. If you're going to bring in more Latinx families into your community, make sure that you are providing information in their language, and be prepared that that language may not be Spanish, that it could be Portuguese, or it could be something else, that it would be your challenge in not understanding that not everybody speaks Spanish just because they're from a Latinx community. And be prepared to provide your information, not just in the internet fashion, which a more Eurocentric population is accustomed to, but be prepared to drop school flyers at churches and marketplaces where there are some lower income people of color, that's their place of connection, their place of trust, and their place of communication with people that they feel that they can trust. And think carefully about what you require of your student body so that you don't bring in students of elementary school, parents of elementary school students who are really hoping that their child does really well, but they don't have the Apple laptop that everybody else has that you require for the homework assignment that you're expected to do. It's like you have to be able to have that understanding in your head to provide equal access to all of the students, and be prepared that your school may then need to make some changes. We do not, as a school, allow parents to pay for after school events. We have never allowed for that. After school, not events, but lessons. We've never allowed for parents to pay for ballet lessons or something else where they come into the school. And the reason is because if we can't make sure that all children can have access, then we don't do it. And so that has been a premise of our school, that we have just said to parents, it isn't something that we can provide for everyone. And so we don't provide it for anyone, something that you need to do on your own outside your school, or you can fund everybody. And then we can all take part in that.
You cut out at the last minute, Cindy. Did you ask a question?
Yeah, is it in the chat now?
Yes.
It is, okay.
Yes, it is in the chat.
So that is your homework, and what I want you to do with the homework, and then we can hear other people's chats and comments, but what I want you to do with the homework is to look at the document. If you have the capability to be able to put your notations on electronically, you can do that. Otherwise, please print it out and read it, but read it. Read it so as to make application. And so what I'm asking for is that you go paragraph by paragraph and that you're looking at it and saying to yourself, how does this apply to me? What's something that I can make a goal? And start to prioritize some things that you can do, some changes that you can make, and separate them out as to minor and major, or something that can happen now, something that is, but make it goal oriented so that it's achievable for you, but something that you can actually do. And you can take the same information and you can apply it to teacher training programs as to what you do with your teacher training program to try to diversify the training program. It's an incredible document for that, because it gives enough practical steps for someone to be able to say, this is a piece that's attainable by me. This is a piece where we can have buy-in. Any thoughts about that?
I'm watching the chat. There was some discussion, but I think everyone's busy clicking on the link and downloading the PDF so they can take a look at what you're referring to. I'm watching, Terry does have her hand up, so we'll go to Terry Sherrill.
I was just going to mention something that sparked for me when Cindy was talking, and it's an idea that Tim Selden talked about when I was first working with him back in the 90s. And he came and talked about, I think he called them affinity groups, and talked about how schools in a community could come together to share teacher development and all sorts of things like that. And he said that a rising tide lifts all boats. And it just seemed to me like a way that brings Montessori to the forefront and inclusion. So maybe it's a twofer in that at that point, people where we had sister schools, it really got off the ground, and then I moved out of the community and I don't know what happened. But for a while, it was pretty wonderful because we did have different parts of the city kind of Montessori kind of connected, and we were doing group things like art on the downtown city's hall and things like that. So anyway, just other ideas about connecting schools, sharing materials, just being with each other in community and normalizing community in that way where everyone's welcome. That's all.
Thanks for reminding
And
us.
Terry, was it connecting with other schools that are different from your own, or with different populations, things like that?
At the time, it was all Montessori schools of the area. So we did have, we have two, it was in Dallas, so two big public Montessori schools, plus a whole satellite system of Montessori schools, which, like I said, included East Dallas Community School and Terry Ford's Bachman Lake School and some other. So yes, we kind of, once we met each other and started hanging out, then a lot of things flowed as far as activities and just kind of things grew organically. And I think that it eventually unraveled, but the idea was a rising tide lifts all boats, and that we could, that we could reach out to other Montessorians, and yes, and diverse Montessorians too. And like I said, just broaden the community to include all schools within, like for Dallas, North Dallas, South Dallas, East Dallas, West Dallas, and not be in our little enclaves, but to kind of create in a city, a community, a network of Montessori schools, rather than the competing against each other or any of those kind of things. That it was a pooling of resources for some of those commercials and flyers and things like that we've talked about. So anyway, it was an old idea, but a good idea, and maybe it could be, brought off the back burner again as another way to do things. One more tool.
Gotcha. Yeah, it would be an interesting thing to be able to do to help schools to attempt to work together to achieve more diverse communities.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't want to make that be the way that we deal with that, to connect with the predominantly Black Montessori school on the other end, and then feel like we've made it. But it would definitely be something that if schools were all working together to have the same kind of commitment, it would be a wonderful thing to be able to have.
Yeah, I think it gives us a lot to think about in how we can partner and think outside of our own school walls. And I see Tanya Melville has her hand up, so we'll go to her next. And Cindy, oh, and then to Michael, I see your hand. And then Cindy, I just want to give you the heads up. We have about 10 minutes remaining.
Okay.
I'll make it quick. I'd just like to piggyback on what Terry was saying, in that I admire Charleston City School District in that they determined that they were going to have a public Montessori school in each of their zones. And I think that, again, you know, I'm speaking on behalf of public Montessori, but there's Montessori, and Montessori is Montessori, public or private. I do think that the sustainability frameworks that we put in place for public Montessori schools are key to making sure that there maintains a diversity within our public Montessori schools, because I think that's one of the great beauties of a public Montessori school, especially if it's done on a non-criteria based approach, that you can have children come into your school at the very youngest level and move the whole way through an eighth grade or kinder program. And I think our students speak volumes out there in the public school paradigm. And I think that if there was a way where the training centers could connect with school systems and come to the school systems to offer it, I think that would be another opportunity to kind of grow the diversity within the nation, not just within our region.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting, people who have been connected to Montessori for a long time, do you remember when you would go, oh my gosh, I have one more boy than girl? So I'm trying to achieve that even number. You know, think about if we were paying attention to race. You know, we were never looking at that. We were looking at how old they were and what gender they were. And think about if we were just that committed.
Think about that. You're giving us a lot to think about today, Cindy. I'm going to go to Mike. Mike Crum.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Hey, everybody. So I've been just thinking about everything, and you know, I'm always kind of, unfortunately, I don't know why, but I'm always kind of skeptical. Now, I'm up. You know, I think of things in terms of the lowest common denominator. You know, like what is the problem here? You know, I've been around Montessori, you know, through my wife here, who started a school, and it's very much a business. You know, it's a heart and soul. But when she went to do it, the steps she took, it's a business. You know, she's going to hire in such a way that is going to make sure that it survives. I'm sure she wants diversity, and she wants, you know, to be culturally correct, but I'm sure she's going to do whatever it takes to make sure that, you know, things survive. And I think when we get off the call, you know, we all, if we're in business, if we're business owners, you know, and I'm not trying to lecture anyone, I'm just giving my opinion. So let's put a pin in that, put it to the side for a second. You know, my son, right? I tell him, you need to work hard and do this and do that, because if you don't, there's going to be a bad outcome. Just, he's on one generation underneath me, and I'm telling him, just the next generation underneath me, if you don't do this, and if you don't do that, and if you don't get an good education, you're going to have difficult results. You won't be able to take care of your family, and it's going to wind up bad for you. All right. So that's what I tell him, the generation above him. In my mind, I take that situation and I multiply it by, I don't know, you know, 100, however many generations go by. When it comes to the matter of generational economic disparity, right? I look at it, right? So African Americans, Blacks, or other, I don't know, they regularly face higher unemployment rates, okay? And there are a ton of reasons why, but most often it is just outright discrimination, right? So then also because of that, for whatever the reasons are, redlining and all sorts of, loans and problems with loans, preferential loaning or high interest rates, which these things exist, then, a lot of people I know in the Black community, their kids are less likely to be able to afford certain things, go to college. It's real. It's actually happening again. And you guys know that, all right? Take it a step further. Graduate college, even less likely to go. They don't get the education a lot of the time, although the opportunity is there. Yes, you can take out a loan. There are things you can do, but it's not as prevalent or not as easy. So there are barriers to getting that education, all right? And then even more when they do wind up with an education, BA, BS, it's a tough time paying the loans back because they're underemployed. And probably even less likely to go to graduate school for the same monetary reasons, okay? So we take that situation and you multiply it generation after generation after generation. Here's me telling my son, just one generation below, that if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do, you're not gonna make it. So you multiply that generation by generation by generation, and we see what kind of bloodletting does that bring about? What kind of situation does that bring about? What strain does that put on the family year after year after year after year? I was reading recently in one of my classes that Maria Montessori mentioned the fact that the child absorbs the culture, just absorbs it for the first few years. And even in that postpartum embryonic phase, they're still learning just from being in the room. And I think about the households of the people that can't afford certain things, or the single mom, because of years and years and years of this systemic racism, because it's real. What are the conversations like? What's baby picking up? What's baby boy picking up? What is he hearing? What are mom and dad talking about? After years and years and years, it's rolled into the batch. Even when they do well, even when we do well, it's rolled into the batch. And then one of the things that Maria Montessori said that really struck me is that a man loves where he comes from. He loves his culture. He loves the land that he came from. And while some of these things are negative to many people, for a lot of people in the African American culture, we grow up holding on to the things that are deemed as negative. So anyway, I'm taking the story on. So you've got what might be presumed or seen as attitude or negativity, but it's rolled into the batch over year after year after year after year. So then that girl or that guy walks into my wife's school and looks for a job. And my wife, there's 10 better candidates, 15 better candidates with a better attitude, or who had a better school experience, or who just don't have that, I don't know, they just, whatever. I'm talking about that the product of the generational activity runs into our school or comes up for an interview, and my wife, who's an African-American, who's Black, what does she feel? What does she feel about this individual? Regardless of race or color, she may just feel like I used to feel when I was in the corporate situation that, I'm not liking the attitude here. I'm not feeling it. Now, I'm not blaming anything on anything. I'm just saying, maybe there's a dynamic that a cycle needs to be broken, not eased, not kind of moved away or pushed to the side. The cycle of racism needs to be broken because, after we get off this call, at the end of the day, we have businesses to run, and I know that Montessori is obviously it takes a different kind of situation, a different kind of heart, but the type of individuals that are produced as a result of racism, and this is just, my opinion, just refeeds this cycle, of perpetual futility. It just goes on and on and on and on. And racism is the lowest common denominator. My civics teacher in England, Miss Grant, used to tell us, when you're having an argument, look for the lowest common denominator and attack that foundation. And it's racism. It's even in the best outcomes, you know, I feel like people who are qualified, you know, can be overlooked.
Mike, you've given us once again
Yeah.
a lot to digest and think about, and always appreciate your sharing.
Yeah, and I'm going to make a note because I would love for us to piggyback on that, because our work covers a trajectory. You know, we're at the very beginning. We're at the nido. We're at the very beginning of creating, helping to create beings who are not going to end up in those situations. And we're at a point where there are some people. And I do see people like that sometimes. And I'm hard as a boss, because if I see something, I'm going to call it. And I call it particularly in people of color because I want them to be able to succeed. And so I will say, go try this again. Or I'm going to give you another week. I want you to try this again, to see whether or not they can pull out of it, to say, and I call upon myself to be a model, and I call on the school to be a model of support around people as well. And then there are some people who end up being a casualty of racism, who unfortunately don't end up being able to make it. And that's the hardest part, is that there are so many, because it's been going on for so long. Kathy, I know I'm out of time.
So once again,
can I leave?
No, Mike,
leave
please
with a
don't be
poem?
sorry. Go ahead, Cindy.
I'm leaving with a poem, and it's a poem that sort of piggybacks on the video that you saw at the beginning. So I'm going to say that it is also not partisan. Oh, my dear ones, I know you were hoping for a once and done, for an earthquake, a tidal wave, hoping that if we gave it our all, a single push would be enough, that after this, we could sink back into complacency, back into the comfort of our privilege. I confess, in the secret corners of my heart, I wanted to believe it could be that easy, that justice could emerge as from an egg fully grown, not with wet down and weak wings, but beloveds, we are chipping away at a mountain, not a boulder, calcified structures created to oppress, control, kill. Thousands of years with this stupid idea that some are more worthy, that some deserve power by virtue of who they are, what they look like, which tribe they claim. Erosion is slow work, sweethearts. Celebrate the progress, the triumphs. Celebrate also the heartbreaking almosts. Breathe, rest for a time, then get up and turn toward kindness. Turn toward your neighbor in need, toward those who are still trapped in the stone. Tell them, I won't give up. Tell them, I am with you. Tell them, for you, I'll learn to eat rocks. For you, I will keep chewing, keep grinding until the mountain crumbles to dust. See you next week.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for the poem. Thank you, everyone, for coming today and participating. We so appreciate our time together. Thank you, as always, to Dr. Acker and our team at the Montessori Foundation. Appreciate you all being here. Look forward to next week. 3:30 is the time, Eastern time. So keep that in mind again for next week. A new link will go out. Have a wonderful week. Thank you.